Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. Our last video sort of compared, contrasted Paul Simon's Graceland and Rhythm of the Saints. Kind of got me on a Paul Simon / Simon and Garfunkel kick. That's revisited, especially a lot of my Simon and Garfunkel albums. I figured it was time for our album ranking. So let's talk about Simon and Garfunkel. Obviously, giants of folk rock, folk pop music from the 60s. They started off very traditionally. Actually been together since I think the late 50s, or they started out as a duo calling themselves Tom and Jerry. But they didn't really start recording, or releasing albums till the mid 60s. So, their window only put out 5 studio albums uh, from the mid 60s to 1970, right? As far as their studio work goes. So, kind of a short window, but, definitely an important period, obviously. And kind of an unequal partnership in a lot of ways. I mean, Paul Simon, of course, wrote the songs, played the guitar, sang. Art Garfunkel sang, but I know he was involved in some of the arrangements of the songs and that kind of thing. But it's always kind of interesting to me because I mean, Garfunkel always kind of struck me as believing that it was an equal partnership. Where I don't know if Paul Simon really had the same agreement, and it's kind of interesting once they broke up. A lot of the speculation was that Garfunkel would move on to the more successful career. He was taking some roles in some films, and he was going to keep releasing albums. There was questions whether Paul Simon could really continue, without his charismatic partner. Well, I think time has shown that Paul Simon has done just fine. So, I the Simon and Garfunkel were always kind of a little bit outside of the counterculture. I mean, they were there in that period, but there was something about it. I mean, they weren't really at the center of that counterculture, the hippie movement, the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it. They were always kind of there. I mean, always popular enough to where counterculture people could listen to them. And they appeared at a lot of the festivals and all that. But they were always, safe enough. I don't know what the right word is to where, their parents could also listen to them. I mean, I look at my 5 Simon and Garfunkel records. 2 of them came from my dad's collection, and he was a jazz guy. So anyway, but kind of placing them both, within and also acceptable outside of that whole counterculture, it meant selling a ton of records. They were one of the most successful groups of the 60s as far as record sales goes. One last thing before we dive into my rankings here. Paul Simon, underrated guitar player. I'm a big fan of finger picking and acoustic playing, and Paul Simon, excellent. I mean, one of the best as far, at least kind of in the mainstream of that. Fantastic. All right. Well, let's get to the album rankings. There's only 5 records, so we're going to rank them, and we'll talk briefly. We talk about the Graduate soundtrack. I'm not ranking that one, but we need to talk about it. And we have various live offerings and compilations and that kind of thing. All right. Well, in my rankings, there might be some hot takes. Some people might not agree with them, but I think we can all probably agree on number 5. At the bottom of the rankings, not a bad record, but their debut, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., Exciting New Sounds in the Folk Tradition by Simon and Garfunkel. And it really is in the folk tradition. I think it's a good. I give this record 3 stars. It's a nice listen. It's a good record, but it is very traditional folk. I mean, I think there's a few instrumental flourishes here and there, but it's mainly Paul Simon's guitar and Simon and Garfunkel's vocals. Paul Simon is just sort of getting his feet wet in really songwriting. So about half of these are covers, traditional folk songs. Simon, already though, is proving himself to be an excellent songwriter. Bleecker Street is a fantastic song. Then, of course, there's the Sounds of Silence. I mean, the first version, right? The basically acoustic guitar and vocal version that's on here. Now, that would be controversially, somewhat controversially, but very successfully taken by Tom Wilson, the producer, and he would add some session musicians, I think out of LA, I'm not sure though, some session musicians, the drums and the bass and all that, the version that most people know without Simon and Garfunkel's knowledge. But we'll get to that. But yeah, the Sounds of Silence already shows, a stellar songwriter in the making. But this is a pretty much kind of a very traditional folk record, at least in sound. And they would get way more experimental and daring later. All right, number 4. Now this one might be a little controversial because there are a lot of people that hold this up as maybe their best work. I think it probably is their most, maybe their most experimental, at least. But I've got an issue with it, so let's talk about it. So at number 4, 1968, I do have Bookends. Now this does have some peaks that I think are just absolute top. It starts strong, and I do like that it's kind of a concept record in some ways. Especially that first side, sort of tracing childhood to old age. The second side's it's kind of a place for some singles and B-sides and some extra tracks where they dumped. But the second side's great though. It starts strong. I think the Bookends theme is lovely. Save the Life of My Child, I think, is very experimental in a real good way, especially musically. It's cool. And then the third song, America, gorgeous. One of the most beautiful songs. My top 3 songs of Simon and Garfunkel. My only complaint about America is it's too short. I think it comes in at almost about 3-minute mark. They could have doubled that and made it this epic, and I would have loved it. But it's just that gorgeous music and vocally this great, and the lyrics, this great song about this young couple, traveling by Greyhound bus across America just to discover America and realizing that their fellow travelers, everyone else out there, was also searching, and just beautiful lyrics. Both kind of whimsical and playful, but also very deep and serious at the same time. Just fantastic. And then I think some of the very best vocal harmonizing these guys ever did on those last couple of lines, All Come to Look for America, especially the way Garfunkel harmonizes. Oh, it's stunningly great. Beautiful song. My problem with this record is, and probably why it puts it in the 4 slot, it's the second half of the first side. Overs and Old Friends don't do much for me. They're a little too spare. They just don't really grab me at all. And then, of course, Voices of Old People just grinds the momentum to a halt for me. That this was a kind of a sound collage experiment done by Garfunkel, where he went to these old folks' homes and recorded the old people arguing, talking, discussing things. Made some sort of collage of that. It's an interesting experiment, but is it something you want to listen to over and over again? We want to do repeat listens of this album? No. Just kind of grinds everything to a halt for me. Although the side one does pick up at the very end with a lovely reprise and some vocals with the Bookends theme. Now, second side, Fakin' It's Awesome. Punky's Dilemma is fun. There's some fun lyric. Wish I was a Kellogg's cornflake floating in my bowl, taking movies. It's got some fun, whimsical lyrics there. Of course, Mrs. Robinson, the actual full version, that didn't appear on the Graduate soundtrack. Just stellar guitar playing from Paul Simon there. Hazy Shade of Winter, I love. It's probably their most just straight rock. As hard as Simon and Garfunkel, as hard as Simon and Garfunkel can rock. That's it. It's a great rock song. Although my first exposure to that song, though, was in the 80s with that awesome cover by the Bangles, right? But great rock song. They could have done that more, I think. So yeah, stellar peaks, but it's just the momentum on that first side just slows down for me too much. Okay, 3, 2, 1 are real close. I said Bookends was 3, or I'm sorry, I said Wednesday morning was 3 stars. Bookends would be about 3.5 stars here. So 3, 2, 1. Even within the last hour or two, have kind of jumped around a little bit. I do have at 3, I have their final record, Bridge Over Troubled Water from 1970. Uh, I mean, probably the record with the most complete songs. A lot of their other records have these real kind of short little snippets of different things. This, I think, is all complete, like fully realized songs. This sold a ton of copies, a huge seller. I mean, my dad bought it. It's my dad's record. But yeah, it's some great stuff. I'm warming up to the title track. I've actually never been a huge fan of that. Sounds a little too sappy, but yeah, I mean, a showcase for Art Garfunkel's vocals, and I do love when those kind of reverb drums and everything come in at the end. Maybe I'm getting older and softer, I don't know, but I'm loving that song more. El Condor Pasa, the Paul Simon's fascination with world music starts early here. I mean, it's an old Peruvian tune that he used. Cecilia's great. The Boxer is tremendous. Yeah, I remember reading that they spent a ton of time in the studio getting that down, but it was worth it. Man, it was worth it. Yeah, I mean, some great stuff on here. And I think at least Paul Simon knew that this was it. This was the last one. I mean, So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright, sort of a veiled goodbye to Garfunkel, basically. So is a Song for the Asking. But yeah, beautiful record, beautiful record. All right, 2-in-1. 2-in-1 I flipped, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. It's been interesting revisiting these records, re-listening to them for this video, because for the longest time, what I now have at number 2 has been my number 1. But what I now have at number 1 just blew me away in a way that it hasn't before, in these recent listenings. So I had to flip them. At number 2 now, I do have Sounds of Silence from 1966. Now, this, I still do love this record. Bridge Over Troubled Waters would be a solid 4-star record. I think this is a 4-star record too. This is, a little compromised. They didn't get full creative freedom until their next record, which is coming up here in a second. If you know their record, you know what's left. But so they're a little compromised in that they didn't have full creative freedom here. But I still think it works. You do, of course, opens with the Sounds of Silence song that most people know. Kind of back to that story, So Tom Wilson, the producer, took that track and added the drums and bass and all that without their knowledge or consent. They there was talk that they were, after they released their debut and it didn't do all that much. Paul Simon had been back and forth to England. He went back to England. There was talk they were going to just kind of split up. But then Tom Wilson took this song and it shot to number 1. I remember reading about Paul Simon being surprised. I was like, what's that? But I don't know. I guess I can't complain too much. I love it. It was one of the very few, very rare instances of record company meddling that actually works. Because I think it's a great song. And so they came back and did this record, and then of course had their career. But what Kathy's song is gorgeous, gorgeous song. Angie, so it's the only cover here, the instrumental, but again, shows off Paul Simon's excellent guitar playing. I love that song. April Come She Will, maybe one of the most gorgeous songs I've ever heard in my life. But yeah, great album, and forever my favorite Simon and Garfunkel album. But now it is Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme in my number 1 slot at a 5-star ranking. From also from '66, I believe. Just definitely their most beautiful record, gorgeous from start to finish. Scarborough Fair Canticle, your vocal arrangements on that is just stunning. Yeah, the whole thing. For Emily, Whenever I May Find Her, another showcase for Garfunkel's vocals. I think is more beautiful to me than Bridge Over Troubled Water. Just great. A Poem on the Underground Wall is fantastic. A Simple Desultory Philippic, or How I Was Robert McNamara Into Submission. a lot of wordplay there. Definitely Paul Simon's sort of ode or homage to Bob Dylan, right? Topical songwriting and name dropping and all that. The closing track, 7 o'clock news / Silent Night, I think is stunningly great. I think it is one of the best social commentary, political, if you want to say, songs, anti-war songs. Beautifully, stunningly done. Simon and Garfunkel harmonize over what I think is one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever, which is Silent Night, the Christmas song. Gorgeous. And then they overdub in there excerpts from the evening news, talking about racial strife in the cities, the protests, the Vietnam War escalating, the death of Lenny Bruce. Already in '66, kind of things were getting, really unsettled in the country. They had no idea what was coming in '67, '68, '69. But I think it's one of the most stunning, effective kind of social commentary tracks I've ever heard. I think this is just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous, perfect record. And I finally realized it. So that's in my number one slot. All right, real quick. We can talk about live records real quick. Because they, of course, they broke up after Bridge Over Troubled Water. But they did reunite here in 1981. This was released in '82. The concert in Central Park. Paul Simon's solo career was sort of in a lull, and he was contemplating maybe reuniting with Garfunkel. They did this great show, but their legendary personal conflicts rose up again, and Simon went back to his solo career. But I think this is good. I mean, it's not groundbreaking or stunning. It's good. It is interesting to hear Garfunkel harmonizing on some of Paul Simon's solo songs. That's kind of cool. And of course, they hit a lot of the the Paul Simon and Garfunkel standards as well. It's good. It's good. It's like I said, it's not groundbreaking, but it's good. Now there is one other one, another reunion live album, but Old Friends from 2003, which I don't have. I haven't really listened to it. Probably should. So I don't know how good that is. When you're talking about Simon and Garfunkel, you have to talk about the Graduate soundtrack. Now, I didn't put it in the rankings because it's mostly tracks that had already been on their albums, and then kind of some sort of partial versions of Mrs. Robinson that didn't appear in full until Bookends. But groundbreaking soundtrack, first of all. One of the very first times that sort of rock pop music had been integrated, like as an important element, into a film. And Simon Garfunkel's music is integral to this movie. It's one of my favorite movies too. I love this film. Some people do kind of criticize this record because because of the other incidental music. Half of it's Simon Garfunkel music, half of it is just the music that was playing at the dinner parties and the little gatherings and the strip club and all those different scenes in the movie. I kind of felt that way too until it's kind of interesting. I read the liner notes on the back here, and Charles Burr, whoever wrote these liner notes, made a really good point. It's sort of changed my way of listening to this record, where he talks about how the Simon and Garfunkel music is sort of the internal struggle of Benjamin, the Dustin Hoffman character, whereas all the other incidental music, like the dinner party, the strip club, all that other music is sort of the outside world, and how it juxtaposes as it goes back. I don't know. It makes it for a much more interesting listen. And I actually don't mind the incidental music. It's kind of its time. It's sort of fun. I think groundbreaking soundtrack, definitely. And I think it's pretty great too. As far as compilations, there's a lot of them out there. There's one I'm going to talk to. The one from 1972, right? Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits. This thing was huge. This is the first one I had. In fact, I think my dad bought this for me. He really wanted me to get into Simon and Garfunkel. And, this was my introduction to them. I think it was a lot of people's introduction to them. This thing sold a ton of copies. It's one of those soundtracks that's sort of taken on a life of its own, even though it's that cover. Anyway, but a little cooler on the backside, right? But yeah. I mean, there are more complete compilations out there, but I mean, this one really captures their sound. Doesn't have, missing some things, but it has enough on there to really understand their greatness. And so, I mean, that's the one, right? Yeah, as far as their solo work goes, I mean, I have picked up a couple of Art Garfunkel solo records. Honestly, I haven't listened to them enough to really opine on them. I need to give them more listen. Previous video we talked about these Paul Simon records, Rhythm of the Saints, Graceland, which I know very well and love. Got some other Paul Simon solo records. Got more on CD. I need to visit those other albums more. I mean, I know Graceland and Rhythm of the Saints really well, but I need to visit those other ones more. I mean, obviously Paul Simon would be a whole other video. But, well, there we go. That's my Simon and Garfunkel. What do you guys think? Did I get the rankings right? How would you rank these albums? Just let's talk Simon and Garfunkel in the comments, and we'll see you next time on Amity Tracks.